I'm another Dan, and I have actually been invited to wait for my slides to come up, and I want to take this time to take your picture. Thanks. Now I might win this contest. So here we are. As I said, I'm Dan Miller. My topic is the future of conversational AI, and I think between Dan and Stu, we've heard the term conversation, we've heard AI, certainly a lot, and I'm going to try to ground it in several of the considerations that individuals who are involved in designing customer experience for brands can take into account as they plan their course of action. First about me, Opus Research is a company I founded back in 1986. Back then we were looking at what was going on in high volume contact centers. We looked at how speech technology evolved. Right around the turn of the century, I coined the term conversational access technologies, which has since evolved into conversational commerce. And we focus on intelligent assistance, and some of that is the application of artificial intelligence and a number of technologies to support human goals, as Dan Whaley was talking about. And it also is involved with intelligent authentication, because a core part of establishing trust between a brand and the individuals that are trying to do business with that brand is the authentication of the individual, sort of in a passive, friction-free way, and the authentication of the automated resources that the brands are applying on the individual's behalf. My background, I'm not a technology person. I'm not one of those data scientists that you might want to talk to. I have a business background, an MBA, and then I had worked at Atari, a game company that was defining some of the early ways to interact quickly with computer devices on behalf of trying to win stuff, trying to be goal-oriented and that sort of thing. And also one of the operating companies of AT&T in terms of understanding what's going on in the guts of the communication systems at the lower layers to support interactive transactions and that sort of thing. My major message today, we're talking about the application of technology to support, to use artificial intelligence to support human goals. I've sort of turned AI around and call it intelligent assistance in that context. And, where Stu was saying, hey, we've seen a view of the future that may come to pass in the next 5 or 8 years, we're feeling very strongly, we at Opus are feeling that a lot of this stuff is going on right now. And Dan was talking about how quickly these cycles of refresh of new technologies is taking place. Initially in the speech rec and pattern rec and deep neural networking and learning. These numbers have to do with the providers of technologies that support enterprise intelligent assistance, be it virtual agents, be it the mobile personal assistants and that sort of thing. And the middle of this year, we published a report that had 28 providers of solutions available today that were reporting collectively 1,200 customers worldwide. Those are companies that are implementing their strategies, their plans for intelligent assistance, and representing something like over 2,500 deployments, meaning that we've seen and have examples of, be it a conversational front end to an FAQ, all the way to a human-like interactive agent that responds, that anticipates, predicts, and doesn't quite get to the ordering your stuff that Amazon is hinting at, but these are up and running. So one of the messages are, we don't really have the luxury of the 3 to 5 years to wait, that in essence, our businesses have been disrupted and we must take action now to bring intelligent assistance, to bring artificial intelligence and its components into service for our customers. Now, this is just an example of the number of, Opus also conducts some events of our own. We call it the Intelligent Assistance Conference. We've always put an emphasis on bringing case studies into our onto our podium. And this is an example of a number of the firms that are already implementing our and have given case studies that you can have access to through our websites to show what those folks are doing. And some of them have won our Intelligent Assistant Awards, and you know, it's just there's ways that you can understand how they are different, how companies are differentiating themselves by applying a set of technologies. And we're predicting impressive growth in the spending by enterprises to bring the power of big data, analytics, machine learning into the customer workflow to do that, create those friction-free experiences that we've been talking about. Now, why is it happening now? I honestly think that the expectation that individuals have of the technologies available to them through their smartphones, through all of these devices that are recognizing them, recognizing their intent, have redefined self-service. As you all know, self-service had been a set of technologies that were brought in largely for cost savings by companies that were, you know, use the terms. We have contained interactions that were normally person to person. We've introduced IVRs and websites and that sort of thing in order to automate the customer support experience. But now self-service is a little bit more metaphysical. It is about individuals defining how they serve themselves, and it comes from inside out. And this sort of came from my Atari experience that we learned very early on that individuals wanted to take control of their game consoles. As games went online and that sort of thing, the experienced folks realized that just having a faster communications link or being more experienced with the controls that are put in their hands improved their experiences tremendously. And I think you'll find as individuals use their smartphones or use messaging platforms to accomplish the goals that they're trying to carry out commerce through these multiplicity of channels, that they really are getting better at serving themselves. Self-service is not about automation. It is about turning control, making your resources central to person-centric, like Dan said. And also, these goals have been made easier for enterprises that are implementing their automation strategies by the fact that so much has moved to the cloud. And the cloud is a place where there's almost unlimited compute power, where it is very easy to access the full extent of digitized data that these machine learning resources operate on, because they get better as the compute power gets more powerful and there's more data to look at. So the more data, the better, the more compute power, the better. That's all happening in the cloud. And what's next is you'll see that the early implementations that we followed, those 2,700 I mentioned on those first slides, had sort of a one-for feeling to them. They were projects that were put in, they were proof of concepts. What we're seeing now is companies like Sabio and others bringing in platforms that are a suite of solutions that help enterprises accomplish their goals. There's more capabilities, more sort of pre-configured applications that work right out of the box. There are tools for handling the learning processes, for monitoring how improvements are taking place, so that there's more of a feeling that this is here to stay. This isn't I'm going to do a mobile app or something like that. And the other thing is that we're seeing the evolution of the interactions that companies have with their customers moving to conversations, moving to an ongoing relationship. We have fundamentally redefined what engagement means. And we used to measure success through transactions. Goal-oriented meant that an individual wanted to contact the company, get his or her work done, move on. And we're finding, thanks largely to having these sensors, having these multimedia, multi-channel relationships with individuals, that it's more like a conversation, and that when somebody calls up and asks a question, the intelligence or the resources in the platform for customer care knows it doesn't end just by answering that question. It knows that they're engaged in some longer process to accomplish their goals and serve needs that maybe they're not even accurate in recognizing. Because Dan spoke a bit about the quantum leap in the accuracy in speech recognition that happened in a very short period of time. But that's just part of the story, that recognizing the utterances accurately means you can render words. But when you have a huge database of when those words occurred, when it meant something that a person is, we're not very precise, as I'm an example of. We're not very precise in expressing ourselves. And now we're finding that the computers can understand that, hey, you called up and had a question about an insurance policy, but you're really contemplating buying a car or something like that, and just sort of understanding what the full range of your journey is based on a little bit of information that you might provide through a spoken or texted in question. So those are, we see a market, something like $1 billion was spent last year, moving up to $4 billion in terms of enterprises spending on some form of intelligent assistance. It could actually turn out to be a lot more if you start considering what the other multipliers are across, not just the licensing of platforms, but the tweaking and tuning of the solutions. And what's really going on is that we've seen the maturation of solutions being accompanied by a fundamental change in how individuals interact with enterprises, moving along a continuum that's fairly easy to understand. So back at the turn of the century, when some of the early providers of what I would call conversational front ends to essentially FAQs, they had a set of static information that they would ingest. There would be a limited number of information sources, like product catalogs, like a history of activity, and a largely one-way conversation going on, that an individual would be pointed at, would have a topic that maybe some intelligence would recognize and come up with an answer. And those kind of worked. Those helped accomplish an automation goal. Over the past, I would say within the last 5 years, we've moved into a transactional mode where enterprises discovered that they have a tremendous amount of data that they've ingested about the individuals in CRM systems, about their customers, more detailed information about their products and product catalogs and services offered, inventory status, and that sort of thing that incorporates not just the structured FAQ sorts of stuff, but unstructured data like the utterances or the words that people have used to say the same thing, and that there's a lot more of this information available in real time to support a customer experience because we all live life in real time. It's nice that we can watch the news at the end of the day and that sort of thing, but when we're out shopping or trying to decide what school to send our kids to and that sort of thing, it's just important we'd like to know right now. But in transactional, those were still largely one and done activities that a system or an enterprise would measure success by saying, hey, did I answer that question? Can I move on? And that was the end. So we're at a point where we're moving to a more conversational engagement model between enterprises and their prospects and customers. It means that they recognize early that the questions being asked and answered are part of a more complex process that they're trying to support. With all these sensors out there that Dan talked about, you know a lot more about the state of the individual that's calling and his or her preferences. and you manage to turn the control of the conversation over to the individuals. So that's what we're trying to move, well, we're not trying to, but we are moving towards that the experience that the best companies out there provide to their customers and prospects are the product of using that pattern recognition to really recognize where they're going and support them along that path. And it's all coming together more or less. So we call this conversational commerce at Opus Research, but when we conducted our survey, we were mostly looking at the acquisition of those resources by enterprises to put into their customer workflows. And they were, growing out of contact center investment, out of IVR, or out of their mobile commerce strategies. And the introduction of something like Amazon's Alexa or Google's agent have brought, and actually going back to maybe 2.5 years ago when Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook invited tens of thousands of individual developers to start building bots for messaging platforms. We've seen the recognition, we've seen the application of artificial intelligence and these resources that we had largely thought of as spoken move over to text. We've seen the proliferation of devices that are not phones appearing in households around the world, and it seems much more chaotic. It's much more of a challenge for brands to build bonds between their customers across sort of a cacophony of technology platforms and devices that individuals are using. So here's where Opus Research is working to try to provide some order out of that chaos, to give decision makers within enterprises some framework for understanding the elements of the solutions that they have before them. And I think probably in the back this is something of an eye chart, but what we have divided the technologies that are brought to bear into two broad categories and put these in the bottom layers here. And it's probably hard to read, but there are intelligent assistant or conversational technologies that you can think of as a front end that start with these conversational platforms, which are Siri, Alexa, that sort of thing. We've seen a number of bot platforms emerging where that would be the messaging platforms, or a number of tools for developers to bring to bear. Speech remains important. We didn't mention avatars, but we have seen the use of these technologies to provide a human-like graphic representation of a virtual agent that people will interact with. The recognition of emotion and sentiment Dan had brought up, and then the use of biometrics for authentication go into a conversational front end that is brought to bear in front of what we call intelligent assistance technologies, but you'll also think of as artificial intelligence and data management on the back end of either a contact center or a multimedia sort of distribution network. And one of the core technologies here involve natural language processing, that is the understanding of intent derived from whatever somebody has said or texted into the system, and some form of analytics that is recognizing those patterns, recognizing whether the system can answer the question or where to go to get those answers, and that largely has to do with existing knowledge management platforms out there. So laying this foundation to inform the later slides that I'm looking at. But the other elements that we see being made manifest for individuals looking at their options We see these being instantiated as mobile assistants, so that would be, Siri and the other assistants that run on a mobile system. We're seeing the growth of home, and this is looking at these green, orange, and red categories. If you move from left to right, what Opus anticipates happening is that the assistants start evolving into more of an advisor as they ingrain domain-specific information around things like healthcare, travel and entertainment, financial services, and that sort of thing. And that separate from enterprises having these sort of solutions that they're providing, that they'll also disaggregate, or they'll segment into particular disciplines around either marketing, around mobile care, and the customer service virtual agents. That's where we started looking at things. And another area where enterprises, as they consider investing in these intelligent assistant technologies, are internal to the organization. So human resources for onboarding, for helping with sales processes, anywhere where there's a computer process automation going on, as they become more complex and benefit from ingesting more data and applying analytics, we'll see more and more of that. Another interesting area that's happening that I think poses specific challenges is around what we call Medabots, which are these free-floating, non-branded, whether it's Alexa or Bixby or whomever, where essentially those will get more and more personalized. And Dan gave a perfect description of this, that they sort of vanish and become our own avatars, so that we, as we take control, picture this resource that is our personal resource, that does our shopping, does our sort of alerting when things are happening. And that's just starting to evolve. So that may be one of those things that's 3 to 5 years away, but certainly we prepare for it now. But perhaps one of the most helpful ways to think about this, we'll see that what we call conversational artificial intelligence now has sort of 3 pillars of activities that kind of interrelate. But if you look at the left side, that's one of the more chaotic areas around bots, and where you'll see tens of thousands of developers developing, or hundreds of thousands of developers for all we know, developing thousands of bots that seem to be single purpose, that there's 3 or 4 platforms for developing these and distributing bots out for individuals to use. But it's like the Wild West. There's no standards being applied, and they create a certain chaos, if you will, for product planners and service planners and customer experience experts within business enterprises. At the same time, I'll go to the far right here, this notion of deep neural networking and all of the advanced technologies that we have spoken about so far this morning, they raise expectation about the ability for computers to understand what we're thinking before we even say it. And starting with IBM's Watson, we have some high expectations, as Dan mentioned, of companies, or of computers that can win at Go and can use deep learning to get very, very good at specific tasks, but may not help individuals accomplish their own goals. But be it Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft, we're seeing just tremendously impressive advancements in technology and the ability for computers to self-learn, to improve their performance over time, to get more cognitive, and eventually carry out very human-like dialogue. So those tend to be fairly expensive technologies to put into place. And somewhere in the middle, customer care experts and customer experience aficionados have been developing virtual agents to support customer support. And this addresses some of the very practical considerations of the CX and digital commerce executives within some of the leading edge companies, because they're trying to figure out how to leverage the investment they've made in bringing speech recognition, for instance, into the IVR world, or having automated systems support screen pops for their live agents to provide the next best answer. We're solving some of the problems of how you balance the artificial intelligence technologies with humans and the human learning and the human capital that companies have invested in. And it's important to keep your eyes on the ball that just as, even though there was tremendous financial reward in automating many of the customer care processes in order to save money, there's attention to be paid in what the advancements have been baked into some of the solutions. And at this point, while we pay a lot of lip service to moving to deep networking and some of the futuristic stuff, there's a lot of value in the rules-based systems that have been baked into supporting today's speech-enabled systems. And so, you just want to strike a balance and keep an eye on what you're trying to accomplish. To it, I think it's helpful, and this is something that we at Opus tell our enterprise clients to think about, is you really only have two objects of investment to look at. And one you can think of as that back end, the conversational artificial intelligence, where there's a set of centralized resources that you've most likely already made an investment in, and their sole purpose or dual purpose is to recognize the intent of your customers or prospects or people browsing a website or calling into the IVR, and then provide the best answer. And that central, so the major functions involve intent recognition, knowing the best answer, and then learning over time what an improvement is in answering based on just what the experience has been. And then there are a number of decentralized channels that are being brought to bear, and I call these the next shiny objects, so that for a while a lot of attention was paid to supporting the mobile app with all the information that had supported the IVR or that was supporting agents. And then when Alexa came along, there were individual projects brought to bear in order to serve the customers that would come in through that channel. And each one of these shiny objects would tend to attract a lot of attention and investment, and it's never a one and done. So, how you support engagement models that take, that are able to reach customers through things like messaging bots or the speech-enabled IVR should be done in the context that there's a line of demarcation between the centralized resources and sort of the APIs or other interfaces that support contact through these ubiquitous devices, sensors, and whatever, that you want to minimize the amount of customization that takes place. It's unavoidable to have some, but it should be done with the awareness that you want to take advantage of the best of your last object of investment. And a lot of that comes about by matching the implementation of the technology to your business's value proposition. Because when Alexa, well, actually when Facebook Messenger bots came along, a year and a half or 2 years ago, one of the things we kept hearing was there was this question from on high, from the C-suites of what's our bot strategy? And some of it was just, hey, we must have a message bot, but just have to go through the intellectual process of saying, oh, I want to support our brand, obviously. I'd like to provide something in a way that's consistent with turning our customer care strategy over into this self-service, and that ultimately it's going to evolve into supporting this ubiquitous life helper that every individual is going to expect to have supported. And there's a classic, criteria of providing customer delight, of being an agent, supporting an agent or advisor to individuals, and the old guard ones of just call deflection and task completion, but ultimately using these bots and intelligent assistants as a platform for engagement and customer loyalty. Now, the impact on the business value of doing these things right, they relate to the evergreen objectives as well, of retaining customers and preventing the expense of obtaining new customers, of constant operational improvement, and that can apply to those internal enterprise bots, and then revenue enhancement, because one of the things that we've seen is a lot of the intelligent assistants that were implemented early on were in the interest of customer support, and we see a wave of new intelligent assistants emerging that are involved in marketing and sales and revenue enhancements. And it's been sort of a pleasure to see that some of the conversations that start as a help me do X, Y, or Z turn into a sales situation. So common challenges across industries contemplating their implementation strategies for intelligent assistants. Like so many multi-channel, omni-channel technologies, this is an opportunity to overcome some of the organizational silos and technology silos that exist within business organizations. So it's a conversational front end with artificial intelligence and the resources to sort of know where the information, data, and compute resources reside that will benefit a customer directly. And as things move into real time, it almost creates this necessity to break down information silos and that sort of thing. There's a considerable amount of attention that should be paid, as the next shiny object comes along, in implementing strategies that avoid wasting resources you already have in place that are working well, and stranded investment in past solutions that come along, which means that you do leverage existing technologies by sort of taking, listening to companies like Savio that do the sort of integration and understanding of where there may be incompatibilities among existing approaches, and then overcoming some of the vendor sniping that happens when they try to impose the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that go into most competitive situations as you're choosing new technology providers, and then pay a lot of attention to those aspects of the solution ecosystem that are promoting cooperation, federation, and standards. On your radar, should be, how much of this do I do internally? One of the gratifying things, not being a computer scientist, is a lot of the solutions these days are targeting the business unit managers. And there are ways to bring solutions in-house that leverage institutional knowledge other than computer science and that sort of thing. We do keep having to pay attention to what the IBM's, Apple, Google, Facebook, and so are doing. And then the next thing to look forward to is what your Medabot strategy is. And understand that what you're doing now, and I honestly think there's a lot to do in this year right now, prepping for a world of intelligent assistants that accommodates bots and virtual agents and the intelligent assistant, our invisible friends and that sort of thing. But think about where you want to be in the next 3 years in terms of having these technologies support your branding strategy, supporting your engagement models, creating a conversational relationship with customers and prospects. And then I use the word commodity here in the nicest of ways. Somewhere between 3 and 5 years from now, these conversational interfaces and these resources are going to be ubiquitous, and we're going to think of them as a commodity, and there will be, it's not like a major expense or a threshold to cross to bring these into your customer care and customer experience strategies because they're everywhere. And that's where we're headed.